It was an accident, one of those small, meaningless moments you'd never expect to matter. I was walking across the patio, my hands full of laundry, when a sudden gust of wind caught the edge of my skirt and lifted it high. I froze. I didn't need to turn around to know someone had seen. When I did, I found my stepson Mark standing there. His eyes met mine, and in that one charged second, everything changed. It was such a small thing, one of those meaningless moments that you'd never expect to linger, let alone change everything. A gust of wind, the hem of a skirt, and a glance I shouldn't have noticed. But I did. I was outside that day, heading to the laundry line. The sun was bright, cutting through the cool breeze, the kind of spring day that felt too perfect to ignore. My husband David was in his home office on one of his never-ending calls, and the house felt quieter than usual. I had always liked this silence. It gave me space to think, to breathe. I don't know if it was my age or my marriage, but there had been years of this silence, comfortable, but empty. David and I shared routines, not intimacy. I couldn't even remember the last time he noticed what I wore or how I looked. I didn't mind it, or at least that's what I told myself. I was carrying a small basket of laundry, just some light sheets and towels I'd planned to air dry. The patio was clear, and I didn't think anyone was around. I stepped outside, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face as I crossed toward the line David had installed for me last summer. The basket was awkward in my arms, so I didn't see the wind coming. I didn't even hear it. It swept up out of nowhere, a sudden, sharp gust that caught the hem of my skirt and pulled it high, like something out of an old movie. For a second, I froze. The moment stretched endlessly as I scrambled to grab at the fabric, twisting the basket under one arm as I pressed my skirt back into place. I could feel the burn in my cheeks already, a flush of embarrassment, even though I thought I was alone. But then I turned my head, and that's when I saw him. Mark. He was standing near the garage holding something in his hand, maybe a wrench or a rag, I don't know. It didn't matter. He wasn't working anymore. He was staring. Our eyes met, and the air seemed to still around me. For a moment, I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Mark didn't look away. It wasn't shock I saw on his face, and it wasn't amusement either. It was something else. Something that made the heat rise higher in my chest. His expression was calm, unreadable, but his eyes stayed locked on mine, lingering just long enough to make my pulse quicken. I turned away sharply, my hands still clutching my skirt, as if the wind might strike again. I pretended to focus on the laundry line, on hanging up a sheet, anything to give myself a reason not to look back. My heart was pounding, so loud I could feel it in my throat. It was nothing, I told myself. Just a stupid accident. A silly, forgettable thing. But it didn't feel forgettable. The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze. I stayed busy, folding clothes, wiping counters, doing anything I could to keep my hands and mind occupied. It was ridiculous, I knew that. Mark hadn't said anything, hadn't done anything. He just looked. But that look had unsettled me in a way I couldn't shake. I told myself it was because I was embarrassed, because I hadn't felt that kind of exposure in years. But as I paced through the house, replaying the moment over and over again, I realized it wasn't just embarrassment I was feeling. It was something else. Something I didn't want to name. That evening I stayed upstairs as long as I could, hiding behind the excuse of a headache. I could hear David and Mark talking downstairs, low, muffled voices I couldn't make out. Mark had been living with us for a month now, ever since he'd come back from school. He was quiet, polite, and mostly kept to himself. He wasn't a boy anymore, though. I hadn't really noticed that until now. He carried himself differently, confident, assured. I had always thought of him as just David's son, but I couldn't pretend I hadn't seen the way he looked at me this afternoon. The thought made my stomach twist. The next morning, I tried to put the whole thing out of my mind. I woke early, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table flipping through an old magazine. The house was quiet, still half asleep. I was halfway through an article I wasn't really reading when I heard footsteps. I looked up, and there he was. Mark. He walked into the kitchen, his hair still tousled from sleep, wearing a plain white t-shirt and gray sweatpants. It was nothing special, but there was an ease about him. A calm confidence that made my pulse quicken again. "Morning," I said, my voice coming out tighter than I'd meant. "Morning," he replied, his tone even. He poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, taking a slow sip as he looked at me. His gaze wasn't intense, but it wasn't casual either. I could feel it, lingering, just like it had yesterday. I looked down quickly, flipping a page in the magazine as if it held something urgent. My hands trembled slightly, though I hoped he didn't notice. He didn't say anything else. He just stood there, quiet and watchful, as if he was waiting for me to say something first. I couldn't. Finally, he pushed off the counter, set his empty glass in the sink, and walked out of the room without another word. I let out a shaky breath, the silence pressing down on me. I told myself again that it was nothing, that I was imagining things, reading into something that didn't exist. But I knew I wasn't. Because when Mark looked at me now, there was something different in his eyes. And the worst part? I didn't hate it. That afternoon, as I was trimming the roses in the backyard, I caught sight of Mark again. He was washing his car, the sunlight glinting off the water as he moved around it. I watched him from a distance, my shears paused mid-air as he wiped down the hood, his muscles shifting beneath his shirt with every motion. I shook my head sharply, forcing myself to look away. My heart was racing again, my hands trembling as I gripped the shears tighter. This was wrong, I thought. I had no reason to feel this way. But as I turned back to my roses, I couldn't stop myself from glancing his way one last time. Something shifted after that day on the patio. It was subtle at first, like a faint hum I could barely hear but couldn't ignore. It followed me everywhere, lingering in the air when I passed Mark in the hallway, clinging to the silence of the house when David wasn't home. I told myself I was imagining it. I wanted to believe that what had happened, the wind, the skirt, the look, was insignificant. But I knew better. Deep down, I could feel the change between us, and it terrified me. I avoided Mark as much as I could after that. I spent more time in my room or hiding behind projects, reorganizing closets that didn't need reorganizing, cooking meals that were far too elaborate for just the three of us. I threw myself into my gardening, spending hours pulling weeds and planting flowers until my knees ached. Anything to stay busy. Anything to stay away from him. But it didn't matter. Mark was always there, quiet, steady, and unshakable. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He didn't touch me. He didn't say anything inappropriate. But there was something about the way he looked at me that I couldn't handle. It wasn't disrespectful. It wasn't mocking. It was just knowing. That was the part I couldn't stand. Because every time his eyes lingered on me, I knew he'd seen me that day. He wasn't forgetting it. And neither was I. The days blurred together in the way they always did. David was working longer hours again, disappearing into his office or leaving for meetings that sometimes stretched into weekends. I used to miss him, years ago when he first started staying late. Now I just felt relieved. It wasn't that I didn't love him anymore. I think, in some quiet, worn-out way, I did. But love like ours wasn't alive anymore. It didn't move or grow. It was a memory, something we both held on to out of habit. I'd gotten used to it. And then Mark came home, and suddenly everything felt different. I noticed it again one evening. It was late, and I'd just finished tidying up the kitchen. I was standing at the sink, scrubbing a stubborn pan, when I felt it. That familiar awareness that I wasn't alone. I turned my head slightly and saw him leaning against the doorway, watching me. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He didn't respond right away. He just tilted his head slightly, his gaze lingering a moment too long before he finally walked into the room. He poured himself a glass of water and stood at the counter, a few feet away, but the space between us felt smaller than it should have. I focused on the pan, scrubbing harder than necessary, my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel his eyes on me still, the weight of his gaze pressing into my back. It made me feel exposed in a way I hadn't felt in years. When I finally glanced at him, he was still watching me. "What?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Mark shrugged, taking a sip of water. "Nothing." That was all he said before turning and walking out of the room. But that look stayed with me. It burned into my thoughts, following me even as I lay in bed later that night, staring at the ceiling. It only got worse from there. The unspoken tension between us stretched tighter with each passing day. I caught him watching me constantly, when I was folding laundry, when I was cooking dinner, when I was standing in the garden pulling weeds. His eyes would linger, heavy and unreadable, and it made my skin prickle every time. At first I told myself it was just my imagination. I thought maybe I was projecting my own guilt onto him, reading into things that weren't there. But then I started noticing the small things. The way Mark always seemed to be nearby, no matter where I was. The way his hand would brush against mine when he passed me something at dinner. The way his voice would drop just slightly when he spoke to me, low and steady, sending a shiver down my spine. It was nothing. Little things. Insignificant on their own. But together, they felt like something more. It all came to a head one afternoon. I was in the sunroom, sitting in my favorite chair by the window, trying to lose myself in a book. It wasn't working. I kept rereading the same paragraph over and over again, the words blurring together as my mind wandered. I don't know how long I sat there before I noticed him. Mark was in the backyard, shirtless, working on something with his hands, probably fixing the latch on the shed. The sunlight caught on his skin, making him look golden and unreal, and I hated myself for noticing. I stared for far too long before I realized what I was doing. My cheeks flushed with shame, and I turned quickly back to the book, gripping it so tightly the pages crinkled. It didn't matter. I couldn't concentrate. I heard the back door open a few minutes later, and my breath caught. I didn't look up, but I could feel him coming closer, his footsteps soft against the hardwood floor. "Good book?" he asked, his voice low. I forced myself to look up, hoping my face didn't betray me. "It's fine." He didn't say anything else. He just stood there, his gaze lingering on me the way it always did now, calm, steady, and unshakable. I shifted in my seat, my heart pounding in my chest. "Do you need something?" Mark shook his head, but he didn't move. I wanted to tell him to leave, to go back outside and let me have my peace. But the words wouldn't come. I couldn't say them, because part of me didn't want him to go, and that terrified me more than anything. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about him, about the way he looked at me, about the way I couldn't bring myself to stop him. It wasn't just about that day on the patio anymore. It had grown into something else, something I didn't want to admit to myself. I told myself it wasn't real. It was just in my head, just a product of loneliness and a marriage that had grown cold. But the way Mark looked at me said otherwise. And worse, the way I felt when he did. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to make it stop. And deep down, I wasn't sure I wanted to. A line only exists until you cross it. Once you do, it's gone forever. And the space where it used to be becomes something else, something you can't take back. I didn't know exactly when I stopped thinking of Mark as David's son. I only knew that once it happened, there was no turning back. The tension that had been simmering between us for days finally boiled over one night. It was inevitable, I think, as I look back now. A slow-burning fuse that had been quietly eating its way toward the powder keg while I pretended not to notice. It was a Thursday evening. The house was silent, wrapped in that empty stillness that used to comfort me, but now left me feeling exposed. David was out of town again. He'd left that morning for a 2-day conference, promising, as always, to call when he had a moment. I didn't expect a moment. I rarely got them anymore. The evening air felt warm and heavy as I moved through the house, restless and unable to settle. I turned on the television in the living room, trying to drown out the silence, but I couldn't focus on anything. I kept glancing at the clock, listening for sounds that weren't there. I didn't hear him come in. When I turned, Mark was standing in the doorway. He leaned casually against the frame, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jeans. He looked at me the way he always did now, calm and quiet, his gaze unflinching, like he knew something I didn't. My pulse quickened. I turned back to the television, pretending I hadn't noticed him, though I could feel him still watching me. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked, my voice thin. He didn't answer right away. I heard his footsteps as he moved further into the room. He sat down on the other end of the couch, close enough that I could feel the weight of him there. The air between us felt charged. I didn't look at him, but I could sense him watching me. It made my skin tingle, made me hyper-aware of the way my hands were gripping the edge of my skirt. I could have left. I could have stood up and disappeared into my bedroom, closing the door behind me, like I had so many other nights. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed rooted in place, my breath shallow, my heart thudding heavily in my chest. I don't know how long we sat there like that, silent and unmoving, before he shifted. It was subtle, a small movement that shouldn't have meant anything. His arm lifted, resting on the back of the couch, his fingers barely brushing my shoulder. I froze. He didn't say anything. He didn't move again. It wasn't an accident, though. I knew that. The touch was light, deliberate, a question he wasn't asking out loud. The smart thing to do would have been to stand up, to walk away and pretend it never happened. But instead, I turned my head to look at him. Mark met my gaze, his expression steady. He wasn't uncertain. He wasn't afraid. I should have been. "Mark?" I started, but my voice faltered. I didn't know what I was going to say, anyway. His hand moved then, slow and deliberate, his fingers brushing against my shoulder again, before trailing down my arm. The touch sent a shiver through me, my skin suddenly alive and burning. "Don't," I whispered, though it came out weak, unconvincing. He didn't stop. His hand lingered against my arm, warm and steady, and I hated the way my body responded to it, the way my breath hitched, the way I couldn't bring myself to pull away. Mark didn't say anything. He just watched me, waiting. I should have told him to leave. I should have reminded him who I was, who he was. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I stayed there, frozen in place as his hand moved higher, brushing against my neck, his fingers tracing the line of my jaw. I closed my eyes, my pulse racing as I felt him lean closer. When his lips touched mine, it was soft at first, tentative, like he was giving me time to stop him. But I didn't. I kissed him back. The moment I did, something inside me broke. The kiss deepened, and all the tension that had been building between us for days, weeks, months, came crashing down all at once. His hands moved to my waist, pulling me closer until my body pressed against his. I felt weightless, dizzy, every thought in my head drowned out by the way he was touching me. I shouldn't have wanted it. I knew that. But in that moment, I didn't care. I didn't care about David or the consequences or the line we were crossing. All I cared about was the way Mark made me feel, alive, seen, wanted. When we finally pulled apart, I was breathless, my heart hammering in my chest. I stared at him, my hands trembling as they gripped the front of his shirt. "This can't happen," I whispered, though I didn't let go of him. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. His eyes told me everything. He wasn't going to stop. And neither was I. I spent the rest of the night in my room, curled up under the covers, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I could still feel him, his hands on my waist, his lips on mine, the heat of his body against me. I told myself it was a mistake, that it couldn't happen again. But even as I thought it, I knew I was lying. The truth was, I didn't want to stop. I wanted more. The next morning, I avoided him. I stayed in my room as long as I could, then disappeared into the garden, keeping my hands busy with the endless pruning and weeding. But when I finally walked back into the house, Mark was there. He was sitting at the kitchen table, reading something on his phone. He looked up when I entered, and for a long moment, we just stared at each other. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. But in that silence, I knew. We'd already crossed the line. And there was no turning back. Crossing the line was supposed to make me stop. That's what I told myself, that once it happened, reality would come crashing down, forcing me to pull back before things spiraled any further. But it didn't. Instead, it opened something inside me I hadn't felt in years. It was as if I had been sleepwalking through my life, and Mark had shaken me awake. I felt alive, awake in ways I didn't think possible anymore. And for the first time, I didn't feel invisible. That was the most dangerous part of all. At first, we were careful. Or maybe we just thought we were. It started with quiet moments stolen in the empty spaces of the house. Small, silent exchanges that made my skin burn and my pulse race. A lingering look in the hallway. His hand brushing against mine when he passed me a coffee mug. The way he would stand just a little too close when he walked up behind me, his breath warm on the back of my neck. None of it was innocent, but none of it felt deliberate either. It just happened. I would find myself holding my breath whenever Mark entered a room, my heart speeding up, like I was a teenager again. He didn't say much, but he didn't have to. His presence said everything I was trying to deny. It was late one evening, when everything escalated. David had left that morning for another 2-day trip, and the house felt emptier than usual. I told myself I would keep my distance, but I had given up pretending long ago. I was in the laundry room, folding clothes when I heard footsteps behind me. I knew it was him before I turned around. My breath hitched as I felt him there, standing close enough that I could sense the warmth of him at my back. I froze, the freshly folded towel gripped tightly in my hands. "Mark, what are you doing?" I wanted my voice to sound firm, but it came out shaky and weak. He didn't answer, but he didn't need to. I felt him move closer, his body just inches from mine now, his hands sliding gently around my waist. I didn't pull away. I closed my eyes as his lips brushed against the side of my neck, a soft, deliberate touch that sent a shiver through me. My chest rose and fell in shallow breaths as I gripped the counter in front of me, trying to steady myself. "This can't," I whispered, but the words felt hollow, meaningless, even as I said them. Mark turned me to face him then, his hands resting firmly on my hips as he looked down at me. His expression was calm, steady, but his eyes burned with something I didn't want to name. I didn't fight him. I didn't resist when he leaned down to kiss me. The moment his lips touched mine, everything else disappeared. The house, the guilt, the ghost of David somewhere out there living his life. There was only Mark. That night, I let it happen. I didn't stop him when his hands slipped under my shirt, or when he led me upstairs, his fingers tangled with mine as we moved through the darkened house like thieves. I didn't stop him when we fell into the guest room bed, the sheets cool against my skin as he pressed his body against mine. I didn't stop him, because I didn't want to. I let go of everything. Every thought, every doubt, every whisper of guilt that tried to pull me back. I let myself be what I hadn't been in years. A woman, alive and wanted. I don't know how long we stayed there, wrapped in each other, the quiet hum of the house around us. But when I finally lay beside him, my body exhausted and my mind spinning, I felt something I hadn't felt in longer than I could remember. Peace. It didn't last. The next morning, everything felt sharper, more real. I woke before the sun rose, tangled in sheets that weren't mine, with Mark still asleep beside me. His arm was draped across my waist, his breathing deep and steady, and for a moment, I let myself pretend that none of this was wrong. But then reality came creeping back in, cold and cruel. I slipped out of bed carefully, moving slowly so I wouldn't wake him, and gathered my clothes from where they'd been tossed carelessly to the floor. I stood in the doorway for just a moment, looking back at him. He looked peaceful in sleep, younger somehow, and I felt something twist in my chest. Guilt, longing, I wasn't sure. Then I turned and walked out. I spent the rest of the day on edge, jumping at every sound, every movement. I avoided Mark, disappearing into the garden for hours and pretending to be too busy to notice anything else. I told myself it was just one night, that it wouldn't happen again. But that was a lie. Because when the sun set and David's absence settled heavily into the house again, I found myself lingering in the hallway outside the guest room. The door was open just slightly, a sliver of light spilling into the darkened hall. I hesitated. I could have walked away. I could have gone back to my own room, shut the door, and pretended none of this had ever happened. But I didn't. I pushed the door open instead. Mark was sitting on the edge of the bed, his head lifted as he looked at me. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He just stood, crossing the room in a few slow strides until he was standing in front of me. I didn't stop him when he touched my face, or when he leaned in to kiss me again. I didn't stop him, because I couldn't. We weren't careful after that. Or maybe we thought we were. The truth is, we were reckless, stealing moments whenever we could, wrapped up in something neither of us wanted to stop. It happened everywhere. In the quiet of the laundry room, with the sound of the washing machine humming softly around us. In the kitchen, late at night, when the house was silent and the moonlight spilled through the windows. In the garden, hidden between rows of roses, where Mark pressed me against the old wooden fence and kissed me like he was starving for me. We weren't thinking about what would happen if someone found out. We weren't thinking at all. I let myself get lost in him, his hands, his lips, the way he looked at me like I was the only woman who had ever existed. I didn't want to think about the consequences, because I knew if I did, it would all come crashing down. So I ignored the guilt. I ignored the voice in my head telling me this was dangerous. And for a little while, I let myself believe that we could keep this secret forever. Every secret has a lifespan. I knew this, even as I clung desperately to the lie I'd been living. The world was too small, the walls too thin, and no matter how careful we thought we were, cracks would always form. It didn't happen all at once. It started small, as most things do. Little shifts in the air, small moments that made my stomach twist, like I'd been caught without realizing it. The first time I felt it, I was in the kitchen. David had come home late from his trip, and I was cleaning up after dinner while he sat at the table, reading the mail. Mark was upstairs, his presence like a shadow hovering at the edges of my mind. David didn't say anything as he flipped through a stack of papers, but I could feel him watching me out of the corner of his eye. Not directly, not overtly, just a lingering glance that felt heavier than it should have. "Everything okay?" I asked casually, my voice tight. He didn't answer right away. He just shrugged and muttered something about the office before turning his attention back to the mail. I told myself I was imagining things, but I wasn't. It was small things like that at first. A neighbor stopping me at the mailbox, their smile a little too tight as they asked if everything was all right at home. A car I didn't recognize, parked across the street for what felt like hours, its engine off, its windows dark. The worst, though, was the feeling of being watched. I'd be folding laundry or sitting in the sunroom with a book, and suddenly, the hair on the back of my neck would stand on end. I'd turn my head sharply, expecting to see someone there, but the house would be empty. Quiet. I told myself it was paranoia, that I was letting guilt get the better of me. But the feeling wouldn't go away. It was like the walls of the house were pressing in on me, each room too small, each silence too loud. And then the note came. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I had just come back from running errands. Mark was out. He'd mentioned something about meeting a friend, and the house felt unnervingly still. I pulled the mail out of the box, sorting through bills and advertisements as I walked back inside. I was halfway to the kitchen when I saw it, a small, plain white envelope tucked between the credit card offers. There was no name on the front, no return address. My hands trembled as I opened it, a sick feeling curling in the pit of my stomach. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded neatly into thirds. "I know what you're doing." The words were typed, sharp and cold against the white background. There was no signature, no explanation, just that one sentence, damning and undeniable. I felt the air leave my lungs as I sank down into a chair, my fingers tightening around the note. My mind raced, replaying every moment, every stolen glance, every touch, every kiss. Who knew? How had they seen? I thought about the car parked across the street, about the neighbor's strange smile, about David at the kitchen table. Was it him? Did he know? For a long time, I sat there, staring at the paper, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might be sick. When I finally stood up, I folded the note carefully and tucked it into the back of a drawer in the kitchen, as though hiding it would make it disappear. But it didn't. The words stayed with me, hanging in the air like smoke. That night, I lay in bed with the note still echoing in my head. David was beside me, fast asleep, his breathing steady and even. I turned onto my side, staring at the wall as my mind spun. What if he already knew? What if he was just waiting for the right moment to confront me? I thought about Mark, about the way his hands felt on me, the way he looked at me like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. The memory should have brought me comfort, but now, it only filled me with dread. We were being watched, and sooner or later, the truth would come out. The next morning, Mark knew something was wrong. He came into the kitchen as I was making coffee, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied me. I didn't look at him, keeping my back to him as I poured steaming water into the mug. "Are you okay?" His voice was low, careful. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My hands were shaking so badly I had to set the mug down before I spilled it. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. I could feel him waiting for me to say something, to look at him, but I couldn't. Finally, he moved closer. I felt his hand brush against my back. Gentle, reassuring. "What happened?" he asked softly. I pulled away from him sharply, turning to face him. My chest felt tight, my pulse pounding in my ears as I shook my head. "Nothing," I whispered. Mark's gaze lingered on me, his expression unreadable. But he didn't push. He just nodded once before stepping back, his hand dropping to his side. I watched him leave the room, my throat tight, my stomach in knots. I hated the distance I was forcing between us, but I didn't know what else to do. Whoever had left that note wasn't just threatening me, they were threatening us. And the worst part was that I didn't know who it was. The second note arrived 3 days later. This time, it wasn't in the mailbox. It was on the kitchen counter, waiting for me when I came downstairs in the morning. Does he know yet? The message was the same as before. Typed, simple, and chilling. I dropped it as though it had burned me, my breath coming in sharp gasps as I stared at it. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the fear so overwhelming I thought my legs might give out beneath me. David was in the shower upstairs. Mark was still asleep. That meant someone had been in the house. I felt sick. My hands shook as I grabbed the note and shoved it into the trash, burying it under coffee grounds and crumpled paper towels. But even as I did, I knew it didn't matter. Whoever it was wouldn't stop. They wanted me to know they were watching. For the rest of the day, I couldn't focus. I moved through the house like a ghost, jumping at every sound, every creak of the floorboards. I barely ate, and every time I caught sight of Mark, I felt my chest tighten. He knew something was wrong. I could see it in the way he watched me, his eyes lingering a little too long, his expression full of questions he didn't ask. But I couldn't tell him. I couldn't let him know that everything we'd been hiding was starting to come undone. That night, I sat alone, in the darkened living room, my knees pulled to my chest as I stared at the window. The curtains were drawn, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there, looking in, watching, waiting. It was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. Secrets unravel the same way a thread pulls from a sweater, slowly at first, almost unnoticed, until everything comes apart in one violent, inevitable snap. I had known for days that something was coming, that the quiet hum of our house was about to explode into chaos. But knowing didn't make it any easier when it happened. The day everything fell apart started like any other. I woke up before dawn. David was still asleep beside me, his body curled away, as distant in sleep as he was when awake. I sat up carefully, feeling my bones protest, and moved quietly to the bathroom, shutting the door behind me. In the mirror, I looked older. The soft yellow light did me no favors. Lines I couldn't ignore traced the edges of my eyes, and the hollow exhaustion of these last few weeks lingered under my skin. I turned on the faucet and splashed water on my face, as though it could wash the guilt away. It didn't. By the time I came downstairs, Mark was already awake. He was sitting at the table, a mug of coffee in his hand, his gaze focused on the window. The early light cast shadows across his face, sharpening his features, making him look older, harder. I hesitated in the doorway, my heart still twisted every time I saw him, even now, especially now. He looked up when he heard me, and for a long moment we just stared at each other. There was so much unspoken between us, so much hanging in the air, it felt as though the house might buckle under the weight of it. I turned away quickly, walking to the counter to pour myself a cup of coffee. My hands were steady, but I felt like I was splintering inside. That afternoon, the truth came for me. David was supposed to be at the office all day, but I heard his car pull into the driveway just after lunch. The sound of the engine made my blood run cold. I stood at the sink, frozen, watching the driveway through the window as he stepped out and slammed the door behind him. Something was wrong. I turned, catching sight of Mark sitting on the couch in the living room, his expression shifting to something guarded. He felt it too, that quiet, electric sense of something breaking. The front door opened, and David's heavy footsteps echoed down the hall. When he appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face was red, his eyes sharp and cold in a way I'd never seen before. He wasn't carrying his briefcase. He was holding a manila envelope. My stomach dropped. "What is this, Hannah?" David's voice was low, but it trembled slightly, as though he was holding back something bigger. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat felt tight, my chest constricting painfully as I looked at the envelope. I already knew what was inside. "Look at it," David said, his voice louder now. He threw the envelope onto the table, the paper sliding across the surface before stopping near the edge. I forced my feet to move, stepping closer to the table. My hands shook as I picked it up, tugging open the flap to pull out the photographs inside. My heart stopped. The pictures were grainy, taken from a distance, but they were damning. Mark and I in the garden, his body too close to mine. Another one of us in the kitchen, his hand brushing against my arm. And the worst, us in the laundry room, his lips near my neck, my eyes closed, a look on my face that left no room for doubt. Someone had been watching. Someone had seen everything. The room spun. I felt nauseous, my hands trembling as I dropped the photos back onto the table. How long has this been going on? David's voice was low, dangerous. I tried to speak, to say something, anything, but no words came. My mouth opened, but I couldn't force sound through the knot in my throat. David turned sharply, his gaze landing on Mark, who had risen from the couch and was now standing in the doorway. You. His voice was full of venom. You've been sneaking around with my wife? Mark didn't flinch. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, his expression unreadable, his posture steady, even as David took a step toward him. Get out of my house, David growled. I finally found my voice. David, please, don't. He turned back to me, his face twisted with disgust. How could you? How could either of you? There were no words I could offer him. No explanation that would make this any less horrific in his eyes. The silence felt unbearable, a choking thing pressing into every corner of the room. Leave, he said to Mark again. Now. Mark was gone within the hour. I watched through the window as he loaded his things into his car, his movements slow and deliberate, as though he had all the time in the world. He didn't look back. When he finally drove away, the emptiness of the house closed in around me, suffocating and unrelenting. David didn't say another word to me that day. He disappeared into his office and shut the door behind him. That night, I lay in bed alone, staring at the ceiling, the sound of Mark's car leaving still echoing in my ears. I couldn't cry. I was too hollow, too raw. The house had never felt so empty. In the weeks that followed, everything fell apart. David filed for divorce, moving into a hotel while we sorted out the logistics. The neighbors knew, of course they did. People whispered behind their hands when I passed them on the street, their smiles thin and sharp, their curiosity barely hidden. I stopped answering the phone. I stopped checking the mail. I didn't see Mark again. I thought about him constantly, though. I replayed those stolen moments in my head over and over again, clinging to them even as they brought me pain. The way he looked at me. The way his hands felt on my skin. The way he made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. I told myself I should hate him, but I couldn't. He had been the match that set everything ablaze, but I had been the one to strike it. One day, as I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee, I found an envelope slipped under the door. My chest tightened as I opened it, my fingers trembling slightly. Inside was a single sheet of paper. I'm sorry for everything. I'll come back for you someday. It wasn't signed, but I knew who it was from. I sat there for a long time, staring at those words, my chest tight and aching. I didn't know if I believed him. I didn't know if I wanted to. But for the first time in weeks, I let myself smile, just a little. My name is Sylvia Harrington. I'm 52 years old, a mother, a wife, and a successful interior designer. Or at least I used to be. I sit here now staring at the ruins of my life, wondering how I ended up here. Perhaps if I had just ignored the spark, that moment when someone younger, vibrant, and full of life made me feel alive again, everything would still be intact. But I didn't. There's no justification for what I did. No way to sugarcoat or explain away the decisions I made that unraveled decades of relationships, trust, and stability. Yet, the real destruction didn't come from my affair. It came from what followed. When Alex walked into my life, he was just my best friend's son. A confident young man with his whole future ahead of him. But somewhere along the way, lines blurred, boundaries were crossed, and I lost myself in something reckless and forbidden. That day in the shower, when he invaded a space so intimate, I knew I had gone too far. But it wasn't just my husband or my best friend who suffered. By the time it was all over, someone was missing, another person was dead, and I was left to carry the burden of it all. If you think infidelity is the worst crime a person can commit, think again. The summer heat was always oppressive in Charleston, South Carolina, especially in the afternoons, when the sunlight poured into my office through large bay windows. That day was no different. I had just wrapped up a call with a difficult client, my head pounding from the conversation. My assistant, Miranda, knocked softly on the door and peeked in. "Lorna's here," she said with a smile. Lorna Teague, my best friend for over 3 decades, breezed into the room like a whirlwind. Her short auburn hair was styled neatly, her energy as vibrant as ever. Lorna was the kind of woman who could light up a room with just her presence. After losing her husband years ago, she had thrown herself into social events, charity work, and raising her only son, Alex. "Don't you ever take a break?" she teased, plopping herself into the chair across from me. "You've been at it for hours, haven't you?" I laughed, pushing the stack of swatches I'd been working on to the side. "The bills don't pay themselves, Lorna." She waved her hand dismissively. "You're too good at this. You should let Victor take care of the bills and pamper yourself for a change." Victor, my husband of 25 years, had long since stopped taking care of anything in our marriage. Our relationship had become one of routine and necessity, a shared mortgage, shared social obligations, and little else. I forced a smile, unwilling to dive into that conversation. "How's Alex doing?" I asked, changing the subject. Lorna beamed. "He's home for the summer, finished his 2nd year of law school and already making waves. He's interning at a firm downtown, but I swear he works harder than some of the partners." It was impossible not to admire the pride in her voice. I had known Alex since he was a boy, but in recent years I'd started noticing how much he'd changed. No longer the lanky teenager, but a man with a confident stride, sharp features, and a charm that came naturally. I hadn't seen him in months, and though I wouldn't admit it then, I was curious. That evening, Victor arrived home late, as usual. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner, a roasted chicken with vegetables, when I heard the sound of his keys jangling at the door. He walked in without a word, setting his briefcase on the counter before grabbing a beer from the fridge. "Long day?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He grunted in response, his eyes fixed on his phone. It had become our routine. I would make dinner, he would eat in silence, and then retreat to his study for the rest of the evening. There was no warmth, no connection, just 2 people sharing a house. That night, after he'd gone to bed, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone, pictures of us during better times. One photo in particular caught my attention, a vacation in Italy from years ago. We were standing on a cobblestone street, Victor's arm around my waist, both of us smiling. I couldn't remember the last time he'd looked at me that way. The following weekend, Lorna invited us to a small gathering at her house, a casual barbecue to celebrate Alex's summer internship. Victor, unsurprisingly, declined, citing work obligations. I went alone. Lorna's backyard was as picturesque as ever, with string lights hanging from the trees and the smell of grilled steaks wafting through the air. Guests mingled with glasses of wine, laughter carrying over the music playing softly in the background. And then I saw him. Alex stood by the grill, chatting with a group of people, his easy smile lighting up the conversation. He wore a navy button-up shirt, the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing tanned, muscular forearms. His dark hair was neatly combed, and when his eyes met mine, he gave a small wave. "Sylvia," he called, walking over. "Alex," I said, feeling an inexplicable flutter in my chest. "It's good to see you. You look great," he said, his gaze lingering a little too long. We fell into easy conversation, talking about his internship, his classes, and his plans for the future. He was articulate, ambitious, and confident in a way that made me feel both inspired and uncomfortably self-aware. Later that evening, as I helped Lorna clear the dishes, she nudged me playfully. "Alex couldn't stop talking about you earlier," she said. "He's always admired you, you know. Says you're the coolest of all my friends." I laughed it off, but the comment stayed with me. It happened a few weeks later. Lorna had asked me to swing by her house to drop off some design sketches for a remodel she was considering. When I arrived, only Alex was home. He opened the door, flashing that same charming smile. "Mom's out running errands," he said, stepping aside to let me in. I hesitated for a moment, but stepped inside. We sat in the living room, talking as I explained the sketches. At some point, the conversation shifted to more personal topics. His struggles with law school, his father's absence, and his complicated relationship with his mother. "You've always been easy to talk to," he said, his voice soft. I smiled. but my heart was racing. Alex leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees, as if he were confiding something secretive. His gaze felt heavy, like it was searching for something in me. I tried to ignore the intensity of it, focusing instead on the papers in front of me. "You know," he said, breaking the silence, "I always wondered how someone like you ended up with someone like Victor." The comment caught me off guard, and I looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" Alex shrugged, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "I just mean, you're vibrant, creative, the kind of person who makes people stop and pay attention. And Victor, well, he doesn't seem like the kind of man who notices much of anything." I laughed nervously, unsure of how to respond. "Victor and we've been married a long time. It's complicated." "Complicated," Alex echoed, leaning back into the couch. "That's just another word for unsatisfying, isn't it?" The air in the room felt suddenly thick, charged with something unspoken. I stood, gathering the sketches into a neat pile. "I should get going," I said, my voice wavering slightly. Alex stood too, his movements slow and deliberate. He stepped closer, and for a brief moment, I thought he might say something else, but instead he simply reached out and touched my arm lightly. "You deserve more, Sylvia," he said softly. The words lingered long after I'd left Lorna's house, echoing in my mind during the drive home. I don't know when I made the conscious decision to let it happen. Maybe it was after weeks of replaying Alex's words in my head, or maybe it was the way he looked at me the next time we saw each other at another of Lorna's gatherings. We were in the kitchen, away from the other guests. Alex was helping me uncork a bottle of wine, his hands brushing against mine as he passed the opener. I felt my breath catch, and before I could think, he leaned in, his voice barely a whisper. "No one's watching," he said. And just like that, the walls I'd carefully constructed around my life came crashing down. The affair began in secret, as these things always do. Alex would find excuses to stop by my house when Victor was at work, and I'd find reasons to meet him at his apartment downtown, a place he shared with 2 other students who were rarely around. He was attentive in ways Victor hadn't been in years, noticing the small things. When I changed my hairstyle, the new perfume I wore, the way I laughed when I was trying to hide my nerves. For the first time in years, I felt alive. I felt wanted. But with every stolen moment came an undercurrent of dread. The first time I almost got caught, I was meeting Alex at a small cafe downtown. We had chosen it because it was tucked away, unlikely to be frequented by anyone we knew. Halfway through our conversation, I saw a familiar figure walk in, Victor's business partner, Todd. My heart raced as I ducked my head, pretending to examine the menu. Alex noticed my panic and reached across the table, placing his hand over mine. "Relax," he said with a grin. "You're overthinking it." But I wasn't. Todd spotted me on his way to the counter and gave a friendly wave. I forced a smile and waved back, praying he wouldn't mention it to Victor. That night, as I lay in bed beside my husband, the weight of my actions pressed down on me. The thrill of being with Alex was intoxicating, but the risks were becoming harder to ignore. Victor wasn't a man of many words, but he wasn't oblivious either. He began noticing the little changes, my sudden need to leave the house more often, the way I'd linger over my phone when I thought no one was watching, the distant look in my eyes when he spoke to me. One evening, as we sat in the living room, he set his glass of bourbon down and looked at me intently. "Is there something you want to tell me?" he asked. I froze, the question catching me completely off guard. "What do you mean?" "You've been different lately," he said, his tone carefully measured, distracted, secretive. I felt a wave of panic rise in my chest, but I forced myself to remain calm. "It's just work," I said quickly, "a new project with a difficult client." Victor didn't look convinced, but he didn't press the issue. Instead, he stood and walked to his study, leaving me alone with my guilt. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. Victor was away on a business trip, and Alex had texted me, asking if he could stop by. I agreed, thinking we'd have a few hours to ourselves before I had to leave for a meeting. I was in the shower when I heard the sound of the front door opening and closing. I assumed it was Alex and thought nothing of it, until the bathroom door creaked open. "Alex?" I called out, my voice echoing in the tiled space. There was no response, but I felt his presence before I saw him. He stepped inside, his figure visible through the frosted glass of the shower door. "What are you doing?" I hissed, trying to keep my voice low. He didn't answer, just slid the door open slightly, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my stomach flip. "I couldn't wait," he said, his voice low and unapologetic. The moment was electric, charged with a mix of fear and desire. But before anything could happen, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway shattered the tension. Victor. Panic surged through me as I shoved Alex out of the bathroom and scrambled to get dressed. By the time Victor entered the house, Alex was gone, slipping out the back door unnoticed. I managed to greet my husband with a forced smile, my heart still racing. I didn't sleep that night. My mind raced with thoughts of what could have happened if Victor had walked in a few minutes earlier. The risk was no longer an abstract fear. It was real, tangible, and terrifying. Victor didn't seem to suspect anything, at least not yet. But the close call left me shaken. For the next week, I avoided Alex, ignoring his texts and calls. I told myself it was over, that I couldn't keep doing this. Not to Victor, not to Lorna, not to myself. But Alex wasn't the kind of person to let things go easily. It started with small things. A bouquet of flowers delivered to my office with a cryptic note, a voicemail saying he missed me, a text reminding me of moments we'd shared. "Stop," I replied to one of his messages. "This has gone too far. It's over." But Alex didn't stop. If anything, his behavior grew bolder. One afternoon, while I was working at home, I heard a knock at the door. My heart sank when I saw Alex standing on the porch, holding a coffee cup and wearing that same disarming smile. "You can't be here," I said, stepping outside and closing the door behind me. "I just wanted to see you," he said. "You've been avoiding me." "I have to," I said firmly. "It's not safe." Alex's smile faltered for the first time. His expression darkened, and for a moment, I glimpsed something in him I hadn't seen before. Resentment. Maybe even anger. "You can't just cut me off like this," he said. I glanced over my shoulder, paranoid that a neighbor might be watching. "You need to leave," I said, my voice trembling. Alex stared at me for a long moment before turning and walking away. The next week passed in a blur. I threw myself into work, desperate to keep my mind occupied. But no matter how much I tried to focus, I couldn't shake the feeling that my carefully constructed world was beginning to crumble. And then, the worst happened. It was a quiet evening. Victor was in the living room, reading a book, while I sat at the kitchen counter, pretending to go over invoices. My phone buzzed, and out of habit, I glanced at the screen. It was a text from Alex. "I miss you. I need to see you." Before I could react, Victor's voice broke the silence. "Who's texting you so late?" I froze, my mind scrambling for an excuse. "Just a client," I said, forcing a casual tone. Victor set his book down and walked over. "Let me see." My stomach dropped. "Victor, it's nothing." But he wasn't listening. He reached for my phone, and in my panic, I hesitated just a moment too long. That was all it took. Victor unlocked the phone and read the message. His face darkened, his jaw tightening as he scrolled through the texts. "You've been lying to me," he said, his voice low and dangerous. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. "Who is he?" Victor demanded, slamming the phone down on the counter. Tears welled in my eyes as I tried to explain, but there was no justification, no excuse that could make this right. "It's Alex," I finally admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Victor's face contorted with disbelief and fury. "Alex, Lorna's son? Are you kidding me, Sylvia?" I don't remember much of what happened after that. Victor stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. I spent the rest of the night in a daze, replaying the moment over and over in my mind. The next day, I got a call from Lorna. Her voice was sharp, her words cutting. "Victor told me everything," she said. How could you? How could you do this to me, to your family, to my son?" "Lorna, Don't," she snapped. "I don't want to hear your excuses. You're disgusting, Sylvia. You've ruined everything." And just like that, our decades-long friendship was over. The fallout was swift and brutal. Victor moved out of the house, filing for divorce within weeks. Lorna cut all ties with me, refusing to even acknowledge my existence. Word spread through our social circle, and I became a pariah overnight. But the worst part was losing Mia. My daughter had always been distant, but when she found out about the affair, she called me in tears, accusing me of destroying our family. "I don't know who you are anymore," she said before hanging up. I tried to tell myself I deserved it, that this was the price I had to pay for my mistakes. But the loneliness was suffocating. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, they did. It started with a series of anonymous messages, short, cryptic notes left in my mailbox or taped to my car windshield. "You'll pay for what you've done." At first I thought it was Victor or Lorna. But then I began noticing other strange things. A car parked outside my house for hours, headlights cutting through the darkness late at night, the sound of footsteps on my porch when no one was there. One morning, I found my car vandalized. The windows were shattered, and the word "whore" was spray-painted across the hood. I reported it to the police, but there was little they could do without any leads. The next time I saw Alex, it was unplanned. I was at the grocery store, picking up a few items when I spotted him in the next aisle. He saw me too and walked over, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," he said. "There's nothing to talk about," I said, keeping my voice low. "It's over, Alex. It's been over." He laughed bitterly. "You think you can just walk away, after everything we've been through?" "There is no we," I said firmly. But Alex wasn't listening. His voice grew louder, his tone more desperate. "You don't get to do this to me," he said. "You don't get to just throw me away." I left the store without buying anything, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. A week later, Lorna disappeared. Her car was found abandoned at a park on the edge of town, but there was no sign of her. The police launched an investigation, questioning everyone close to her, including me. "What was your relationship with Lorna like?" the detective asked, his eyes narrowing. "We were best friends," I said, my voice cracking. "Until recently." "And why's that?" I hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. "We had a falling out," I said finally. The detective didn't look convinced, but he didn't press further. Lorna's disappearance sent shockwaves through the community. She wasn't the type to vanish without a trace, and her friends and family were desperate for answers. The police conducted searches, interviewed neighbors, and even questioned Alex, but nothing led to a breakthrough. For me, it was a nightmare that wouldn't end. Victor called one evening, his tone cold and accusatory. "Did you have something to do with this?" he asked bluntly. I was stunned. "Of course not. How could you even think that?" He scoffed. "You've already proven you're capable of betrayal, Sylvia. Forgive me if I don't take you at your word." His words cut deeper than I cared to admit, but as much as I wanted to defend myself, I couldn't ignore the small, nagging doubt in the back of my mind. What if Alex had something to do with Lorna's disappearance? 2 weeks after Lorna went missing, Alex showed up at my house uninvited. It was late, and I was already on edge after hearing strange noises outside earlier in the evening. When I opened the door, he looked disheveled, his hair messy, his shirt wrinkled, and his eyes bloodshot. "I need to talk to you," he said, pushing past me into the house. "Alex, you can't be here," I said, my voice trembling. "It's not safe?" "For who? You or me?" he shot back, his tone bitter. I tried to calm him down, but he was agitated, pacing back and forth in the living room. "They think I did it," he said suddenly, his voice cracking. "The police. They think I had something to do with my mom disappearing." I stared at him, my heart pounding. "Why would they think that?" He stopped pacing and looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Because I told her about us," he said quietly. The room seemed to tilt, my vision blurring as his words sank in. "You told her?" I whispered, horrified. "She was pushing me, asking why I was acting so different," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't mean to, but it just came out." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Lorna knew. She had known before she disappeared. From that moment on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow that flickered across the windows set my heart racing. One night, I woke to the sound of footsteps outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, straining to hear, but the house fell silent again. When I finally mustered the courage to get up and check, the hallway was empty. I told myself I was imagining things, that my guilt and fear were playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. It all came to a head one stormy evening. I was in the kitchen trying to focus on preparing dinner, when the power went out. The house plunged into darkness, and my pulse quickened as I fumbled for a flashlight. That's when I heard it. A soft knock at the back door. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. No answer. I crept toward the door, gripping the flashlight tightly. When I reached it, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the lock. Then, the knock came again. Louder this time, more insistent. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door and swung it open. Alex stood there, drenched from the rain, his eyes wild and desperate. "You need to let me in," he said, his voice shaking. "Alex, I can't do this anymore," I said, stepping back. "You need to leave." He pushed past me, slamming the door shut behind him. "You don't get it, do you?" he said, his voice rising. "They're coming after me. They think I killed her, Sylvia." I backed away, my heart racing. "Did you?" I blurted out before I could stop myself. Alex froze, his expression twisting into one of hurt and anger. "How could you even ask me that?" he said. But he didn't answer. The tension reached its breaking point when Alex grabbed my arm, his grip firm but not painful. "You need to help me," he said. "You're the only one I can trust." "Let me go, Alex," I said, my voice trembling. Before he could respond, there was a loud knock at the front door. "Police! Open up!" Alex's eyes widened in panic. "You called them?" he hissed. "I didn't," I said, equally confused and terrified. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. Alex looked around, his eyes darting toward the back door. "They're going to arrest me," he said, his voice breaking. "Alex, you need to turn yourself in," I said. "Running will only make things worse." But he wasn't listening. He bolted for the back door, disappearing into the night just as the police burst through the front. The police searched the house, questioning me for hours about Alex's whereabouts and Lorna's disappearance. I told them everything about the affair, the vandalism, Alex's erratic behavior. They didn't seem surprised. 2 days later, Alex was arrested at a motel on the outskirts of town. He denied any involvement in Lorna's disappearance, but the evidence against him was damning. A bloody scarf matching Lorna's DNA was found in his car, along with text messages suggesting he'd had a confrontation with her the night she vanished. I wanted to believe he was innocent, but the truth was, I didn't know what to believe anymore. In the weeks that followed, my life fell apart completely. The divorce was finalized, leaving me with barely enough to keep the house. Mia refused to speak to me, and the community continued to treat me like a pariah. And yet, the worst part was the silence. The absence of Lorna's laughter, the empty space where our friendship used to be. As I sit here now, recounting the events that led to this moment, I can't help but wonder if things could have been different. If I had made different choices, would Lorna still be here? Would Alex's life still be intact? Or was this always how it was meant to end?